Okay, 1 Corinthians 10:25. I guess that's where we're at. I thought I remember made a comment about that, but it says, "Whatsoever sold into shambles, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake." Shambles is one of those Old English words. Okay, and this is one of those words that would be confusing to people. And if you got a new Bible, probably you'd understand a little better, but then you'd mess it up with the other verses. Other verses. What the Bible pattern for archaic words or out-of-date words or words that you don't understand is simply write the margin, the definition of margin. Don't change it. Just simply write the definition in the margin. If you have an Old English dictionary, it will probably give you the right definition. But what the people with the new Bibles would do is they will use this verse to show you why their new Bible is better than the King James. But they don't tell you about all the other places that they mess it up. So this is one of their verses that they're going to try to use. And again, maybe this would be one of the few places where they would help you understand the King James Bible. But again, the King James Bible is the Word of God. Whatsoever sold into shambles. Another word, meat markets. Meat markets. Just write that in the margin. That's all you need to do. Leave the shambles in the text. Don't change it. The reason why is the Bible standard is in 1 Samuel chapter 9, verse 9. Okay, if you go back there, you'll see this is the Bible technique, or the Bible pattern, I guess the word I should use, the Bible pattern of using words that are, shall we say, out of date or no longer in use, is you don't change the word, you just define it. In 1 Samuel chapter 9, you'll read the storyline. Saul, before he is a king, he's out looking for some animals for his dad. In verse 9, he comes across a prophet or a seer. Verse 9, before time in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, come and let us go to the seer, for he that is now called a prophet was before time called a seer. So what's the difference? Not much. A seer sees the future. A prophet prophesies of the future. Same thing. But see, before this, a prophet was called a seer. And so here's a word that at that time has not been used very much anymore. But the Bible pattern is keep it in the text. So if we follow the Bible pattern, when we come across 1 Corinthians 10:25, we talk about the shambles. What we as white folk or Americans need to do is realize that the Bible is an Oriental book. It's not an Occidental book. It's Oriental. And so there are some things, if we learn Oriental cultures, then we can understand some things in the Bible. Now you go to Vietnam, China, Israel, and you go in what they call their marketplaces, you can see why they call it a shambles. Probably the best thing you're going to find here is go to Fetlis. And there's a shambles. It's a mess. And you go on the Oriental cultures, and they're all like that. Almost all of them. It's rare to find them very organized and everything. So that's why they call them shambles. Okay, so shamble in the Bible is a meat market. Whatsoever sold into shambles, or meat market, that eat, asking no question for conscience sake. You don't have to sit there, dicker with them, which they always like to argue about the price. That's just their culture. They don't set the price up. You go buy it and walk out. They got to argue about it. That's, I guess, half the fun in it. But you don't ask them, was this offered to an idol? You don't need to ask that question. Just buy the thing and go. Now, if you're at this shambles and you're dickering with the person about the price, and then somebody off the cuff says, well, this one was offered unto idols. For their sake, okay, forget it. I don't want it. See, that's what he's talking about here in 1 Corinthians 8, 9, and 10. He's talking about areas not to offend somebody in our conduct. Okay, verse 26, he says, now here's the reason why he says you don't need to ask for conscience sake, because it says, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Notice the earth isn't Mother Nature's. Mother Nature submits to Father God. I like what Sam Gibb says. Sometimes he saw a bumper sticker where somebody said something about, be kind to Mother Nature, the bumper sticker, and he yelled out, my son spit on your mother this morning. Mother Earth, yeah, be kind to Mother Earth. Okay, but the earth is the Lord's. Now that would be a quotation from Psalms 24:1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. 27, if any of them that believe not bid you to a feast, and ye be disposed to go, whatsoever is set before you, eat, asking no question for conscience sake. Just eat it. 28, but if any man say unto you, this is offered in sacrifice unto idols, eat not for his sake. That showed it, and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. Okay, so that determines it. 29, conscience, I say, not thine own, but of the other. For why is my liberty judge of another man's conscience? And it's like this. It's not that you have to worry about things, a lot of things in your conduct. The Lord will point it out to you when it's necessary. For example, if you stick a beef stick in your mouth, you're driving down the road. You bought one of these beef sticks, and it dawns on you. Or the Spirit of God says, that looks like a cigar. Now, if He brings that up, you might quickly say, well, that does. I wonder if that offends somebody. If they knew my car, and they knew me, and they saw this thing sticking out of my mouth, they would think I'm Charles Spurgeon smoking a cigar. Okay, I would say that'd be the time to take it out. Or if you got a sucker in your mouth, looks like a cigarette. Or if you got a pencil sticking out of your mouth, a white pencil or something. Or if you take your New Testament and roll it up in your arm sleeve, like some guys take cigarette packs, Or when brown bottles first came out for pop, root beer, that used to be always booze, but now the root beer started putting it out in the brown bottles. Okay, avoid all appearance of evil, the Bible says. But I don't think it's a thing that we have to always be jumpy about. I do believe that the Spirit of God would tell you right on the spot at the time, why don't you just do this at this case? Okay, and that's where our conscience needs to be sensitive and tender towards God. You need to have a tough hide toward man, but a tender heart towards God. Verse 30, he says, for if by grace being a partaker, why am I evil spoken of for that which I give thanks? Wherefore, whether therefore ye eat or drink or whatsoever ye do, do all to the glory of God. Now you don't realize it, but how you eat your meal is a testimony. Or what you eat at your meal is a testimony. Do we know somebody in the Bible who was strict about his eating habits? And this thing became an issue, and he passed the 10-day test, and then he got to eat the way the Lord wanted him to eat for 3 years, and the king noticed that he was 10 times smarter than the other guys. Could have been the eating habits. Most likely it was God, but yet the eating habits do change, or your body, it does help your body. Does a Christian's eating habits, should they be different than the world's? I would think so. Why would we follow the standard American diet? You say, well, it's a government recommended daily allowance. That ought to make you automatically suspect of it. I mean, if they recommend it, do you think they care for my health? I think a lot of times hospital food or hospital meals are designed for job security. to keep the people coming back to the hospital because it doesn't help them. I can't imagine somebody sick in the hospital and then they give them coffee and Jell-O with nothing but white sugar, and they mix it all together in there, and the stuff is not food. It's all man-made, processed stuff. So your diet should be different than the world. You know, we go to the grocery store and buy what we buy. You know, it's a rare thing that somebody don't say something. You know, usually when I buy bananas, I buy a bunch of them. Don't do it a whole lot now, but, you know, I'd go to this one store in Rensselaer because the bananas were always cheaper, and I'd be buying a bunch, and they'd say something about it, and I said, well, I got a bunch of monkeys at home, so what? Or you buy a bunch of carrots, 50 pounds carrots, go up to Myers or get a bunch of carrots for carrot juice. They look at that. You got some rabbits at home? I said, yeah, whatever. Just tell people stuff. They don't know what they're talking about half the time anyway. For a while there, I was going several years ago, I started kind of trying to get rid of paper currency, and I was trying to get a bunch of quarters and halves, because when there's a money change, paper currency is very easy to change, but not coins. So I'd be going to these banks, and I'd be getting all their half-dollar $half, rolled up, and any Susan B. Anthony's. In fact, I'd order 500 Susan B's from this bank, and they'd bring out the white bag, and I'd leave. One lady, her curiosity just got the best of her. I'm walking around with this box of coins. She said, "What do you do with all those?" I said, "I'm weightlifting," and I left. Let her think about that for a while. It's none of her business what I'm doing with it. See, and some people, there's a guy I go to where I get my car or van work done. I know every time I go, he's going to tell me everything that he's done the last 2 weeks. Can you imagine telling people, all your personal things in your life and everything? I mean, just on and on. And I'm sitting there, just work on that car. But that's how some people are. I think you ought to be very private. That's the glory of America. Okay, so whether therefore you eat or drink, I wonder if our drinking habits should be different. I wonder if it does matter what kind of water we drink. Look, if you would, in Deuteronomy chapter 32. This is what convinced me why I should drink distilled water. Either distilled water or rainwater having a cistern. You don't hear too often nowadays people having cisterns. What was that? Deuteronomy 32, verse 1. Give ear, O heavens, O ye heavens, and I will speak. And hear, O earth, and the words of my mouth. Okay, the words of God's mouth. What are they like? Verse 2. My doctrine shall drop as the rainwater. My speech shall distill as the dew. Look at there, distilled water. Only find that in the King James Bible. Distilled water. As the small rain upon the tender herb, and as the showers upon the grass, because I will publish the name of the Lord, ascribe ye greatness unto our God. So he's comparing water to the Bible. Well, okay, is there other places in the Bible that mentions that? Psalms 119:9, wherewithal shall a young man cleanse his way by taking heed thereto according to thy word. Okay, there the Bible is compared to water. John 15:3, now ye are clean through the word that I've spoken unto you. There it is again. The Bible is referred to as water, the cleansing agent of water. Ephesians 5:26, the washing of the water by the word. Well, if the Bible issue is important to us, does it matter which Bible we read? Then it does matter which water we drink. They're parallel. And if you study the issue of water, distilled water, tasteless, odorless. You can't say that about Lowell water. It ain't tasteless, and it sure has an odor. And distilled water is the water your body can absorb. What causes a lot of arthritis is hard water with calcium. and that is settling in your joints, causing arthritis. Distilled water will help remedy that. Just drink distilled water. Drink the amount of, you take your body weight, cut that number in half, and that's how many ounces you should drink in a day. That's the minimum amount. Just think how much water we use throughout the day. As soon as you get up, wash your face, brush your teeth, comb your hair, cook. Everything's water. And that's how much Bible should be in our life. Water, water. Everywhere is water. Your body's what? 80% water. The earth, 80% water. How much water should we have in our life? The Word of God. Man, we should be flooded with it. Jesus told that woman at the well, you know, the one with the water pitcher, and she said, go catch a guy with the water pot. You get the one that's got the water, the showers of blessing. So distilled water or rainwater. You can catch rainwater, run it through a ceramic filter. You've got good drinking water. People say, what about the impurities? What about fluoride? What about chlorine that they stick in it? So why do they use chlorine instead of peroxide? Rainwater is peroxide in it. You know, my brother-in-law, Janet's brother Roy, boy, he's a fanatic on, he calls it Egyptian water. This well water's Egyptian water, and you know, all this stuff Egyptian. So he's got a huge stainless steel tank behind his garage. And he's got that thing all the gutters go right into that tank. He don't filter it at all. He just drinks it right out of that tank. And he said, I'm not sure if this is right or not, but he said, you know, I've been drinking this water for 2 years now, and 2 years ago I was in a junkyard. We like to go junkyard shopping. He's a car and body man. Great place to find things. I was in a junkyard with him last time. I started going through the ashtrays. Found the coins in there. I found $3 in there. We're just going to the junkyard anyway. I mean, they're going to the junk man. So he said 2 years ago I'd go to that place and I'd been eaten up with mosquitoes. He said, last time I went, this last summer, he said, mosquitoes didn't even bother me. He said, I don't know if it's a rainwater. I thought it was probably garlic he was eating. I don't know. Something to think about. But there's something about rainwater. Proverbs 5:15 refers to the wife, but it says, drink water out of thine own cistern. Janet's parents have a cistern in their basement. And rainwater is naturally soft. And so if a person has the opportunity to try to catch a rainwater, you know, I catch the rainwater. I got 6 barrels in my barn, and then we use that for all our animals. And then I try to filter it out with ceramic filters when I don't have our distiller going. But I believe it's very important what kind of water we drink. Very important. Why? Because the Bible mentions in Deuteronomy 32. That was enough to convince me. After reading a lot of stuff on drinking water, how do we know? You go to the store, you see drinking water. How do we know they just didn't stick it under a tap and, you know, turn it on? Distilled water, you could tell. You could tell about distilled water. Okay, so it's important what we put in our body. Verse 31, whether therefore you eat or drink or whatsoever you do, do all to the glory of God. Do all to the glory of God. 32, give none offense, neither to the Jews, nor to the Gentiles, nor to the church of God. Now in that verse, that is the 3 groups of people that the Bible is addressed to. The Jews, the Gentiles, and the church of God. The church of God would be born-again believers, and they would be neither Jew nor Greek. 1 Corinthians 12:13 mentions that. So when a person gets born again, they're neither Jew nor Greek, spiritually speaking. You still have your physical distinctions, but spiritually speaking, you're not Jew nor Greek. You're a born-again Christian. You're a child of God. So the Bible has written those 3 groups of people. The Old Testament, very simplistically, mainly was aimed at the Jews. Okay, now you'll find certain passages that are aimed at everybody. Psalms 49 is an example. Psalms 49, it says it's written to, it says, listen, rich and poor. Low and high. And he gets everybody, Psalms 49. Isaiah 34 is another example, where it says, Hear, O heaven, give ear, O earth. That's Isaiah 1:2. Isaiah 34, verse 1, refers to all ye nations. So that's addressed to everybody. Now, there are some passages addressed to everybody. There are some passages addressed to a Jew in particular. I'll show you a couple like that. Look in Romans 2, verse 17. So when you read through a Bible, you have to ask yourself constantly, who's talking and to whom is he talking? Everybody who reads the Bible sees there is a difference. Hopefully they see this, but they see there's an Old Testament and a New Testament. And everybody has to come to the realization that some of the Bible is written not to you, but for you. Romans 2:17. Behold, thou art called a Jew. Now that's clearly, verse 17 down to 29 is clearly aimed at the Jews. Now can I read it? Of course. Okay, you get a letter in the mailbox. We all do it subconsciously. We look subconsciously to see who it's from and who it's to. We just do it subconscious. Okay, so we have a letter here. And we have to look to see who it's from and who it's to. Now, if I get a letter in the mailbox that says Hoffman's, I get to read the whole thing. My name's in the letter. But in that letter, it may address specifically to Brent, to Heidi, to Janet, to Luke, to Lindsay, to Ashley. Now, I get to read the whole thing. But there's some of it that's not addressed to me. See, now, we get a letter usually from Pennsylvania from Janet's mom. She usually addresses it to one of the kids, so they each get mail. But she ain't going to write her son-in-law. I don't read it at all. Not addressed to me. And so we look at the Bible, we got to look at the same way. Who's it addressed to? Look in Romans 2, verse 1. Who's it addressed to? Romans 2:1. Therefore thou art inexcusable, O man. Who's it addressed to? Anybody. You say, well, it's just men. Sometimes the Bible will use men as mankind. But then there are times where he'll address it just to a woman. Ephesians 5:22. Wives, submit unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. Now, some of these charismatics, what they try to tell you, they say, well, we believe all the Bible. We don't believe in cutting it up. You like, those dispensationalists do. Oh, yeah, they believe in cutting it up. Mm-hmm. Right.
That you like. They just don't understand it whatsoever. You try to explain it, and it's like they always tell us, well, if you're such a good Christian, how come do you eat shellfish?
Right.
You don't apply Deuteronomy to you, but you apply a different verse to you.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's a thing that people don't understand. But to me it's very logical, like the Bible says, to rightly divide the word of truth. And you can easily show those people, okay, you tell me, which one should I obey? Leviticus, shellfish, or 1 Timothy 4, where all creatures? You tell me which one's right. Oh, it's a contradiction. No, this one's written to Jews, and this one's written to the church. Can't you see the difference? See, they don't see the difference. But you see, to me, the Bible as a puzzle all fits perfectly. And when you see the book of Hebrews was written in Hebrews, and you see the time period it's written at, it makes it all completely understandable, and you don't have to add a word, change a word, don't have to subtract anything. You let the Bible speak on its own accord. And that's what makes, to me, is a great blessing. But you see, I see these Baptists who believe in eternal security as I believe in eternal security for the Church of God. But they try to make the Old Testament teach it, and they'll treat it just like a JW will treat it. They'll run to the Hebrew to change English. I read Curtis Hudson's commentary on Hebrews 6:4-6. And he believes in eternal security. And his commentary on that was almost, I thought I was reading a Jehovah's Witness commentary. Because he's run into the Greek to change the words in the English of the King James Bible. If he would just let it sit the way it is and let it speak to who it's spoken to, then he doesn't have to add anything. Okay, so those three groups of people we have to constantly ask ourselves. Now, there are sometimes it's addressed to the husband, sometimes to the wife. Now, how can I apply Ephesians 5:22 to myself? Wives, submit to your own husbands. Can I enforce that on my wife? No. But I can look at that doctrinally. How can I apply that? I look at it as a doctrine because I am the bride of Christ. And I am to submit to Jesus Christ. But practically, that's obviously aimed at a woman. Okay, so those are the three groups that a person has to constantly ask himself these questions. Now, if you don't understand a passage, example, Romans chapter 4, verse 5. Let's try this in Romans 4:5 and James 2. Now, I wrote a young man who was training to be a priest, a Catholic priest, had email back and forth. We had several letters. Oh, I can't even tell you how many letters we had back and forth. And we got on this some of the letters always got on this Romans 4 and James 2. Now these two verses are clearly opposing each other. Romans 4:5. But to him that worketh not, but believeth on him that justifieth the ungodly, his faith is counted for righteousness. Notice a man gets righteousness by faith alone, no works. But James 2 says, James 2, verse 22, seest thou how faith wrought with his works, and by works was faith made perfect? Verse 21, was not Abraham our father justified by works? Okay, one says no works involved in justification, no works involved in imputed righteousness. James 2 says, you've got to have works involved. How would you answer that to somebody? Okay, well, you could answer several ways. First off, you don't want to base a doctrine on a verse with a question mark, verse 22. That's logical. Okay, now that's if you don't know any doctrine. If you don't know any doctrine, you could easily say that. Another thing you could easily say, James is writing about faith being shown to man. Now that's usually how Baptists interpret this. Okay, let's see, they come up with that one. Verse 18. Yea, a man may say, thou hast faith, and I have works. Show me thy faith without thy works, and I will show thee my faith by my works. Now this is the usual fundamental Baptist interpretation. Okay, they say James 2 is demonstrating faith to man in his eyes. Romans 4 is demonstrating faith to God in his eyes. And God says faith alone is good enough to justify him, but man says you have to have works to justify it. Now that's the typical fundamentalist Baptist belief. And that's okay. That's okay. But a doctrinal interpretation is stronger. What's a doctrinal interpretation? Who's James written to? Chapter 1, verse 1, to the 12 tribes. Jews. They're in the tribulation. Why is it written to them in the tribulation? It reverts back to Old Testament salvation. Gives Abraham as an example in James 2. Abraham was justified by works when he offered up Isaac. That's Genesis 22. Abraham received imputed righteousness by faith alone. That's Genesis 15. Several years apart. Abraham received righteousness by faith, but he received justification by works. You and I in the New Testament get both those at the same time. So that's a clear difference if you don't add a word, if you don't subtract it. Now, who's Romans written to? The saints of Rome. And I would pose this question to this Roman Catholic priest. And I'd say to him in my letters, which is logically safest for you? A Roman Catholic, a Roman Christian. Isn't it safer for you to go with Romans 4 or 5, because it was written to Roman saints, or James, written to 12 tribes? Every time, you know what he said? James 2. I don't register with my brain. He never gave a reason, except I knew his reason. It would overthrow his entire religion. Yeah. No, he never said that.
They teach those priests not to get cornered.
They teach, yeah. Oh, he was shifty. And I told him, I eventually wrote him, and I said, you're going to make a good priest. Boy, you lie, and you say this, and you can do that, and man, you're going to make a great priest. It's my understanding he eventually got out of the seminary. I don't think he's completed his training of a seminary aspect. So, doctrinally, Romans is definitely clearest to be safest ground for us. And even more things I would try to convince him that he should stick with Romans. I would say your first vicar, Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, tells you in 2 Peter chapter 3:15, read Paul's writings. Still wouldn't listen to the first vicar. And then I'd say, Simon says, you need to go what Simon says. Play Simon says. Simon says, what'd Simon say? Well, Cornelius came and bowed down to him, and Simon said, get up. I wonder if the Pope's going to tell him to get up. I played that on the radio. Simon says, I have a mother-in-law. Simon says, went through the whole thing, and how do you get out of all those things? I don't know how they do it. My diehard Catholic fan on the radio, he never called me about Simon Says game. He can't. I don't think he can argue it. How can he argue it? Simon says, 2 Peter chapter 1, the Scriptures are not of any private interpretation. So what did Simon say? No church can interpret the Bible. What did Simon say? Simon says the Scriptures are more important than any vision anybody's ever had. Boy, everything what Simon was saying was right against the Pope. Everything. And they sure don't want to play Simon Says with me anymore. And so what you do is you quote their authority to overthrow what they're saying. And what you're doing is you're exposing them to be liars. Okay, so the Bible is written to three groups of people. Jews, Gentiles, Church of God. Doctrinally, the Church of God can get their standards from Paul. Romans to Philemon. Now that's for doctrine. Do we limit ourselves to that? No, that's what a hyper-dispensationalist does. We study the Bible from Genesis all the way to Revelation. But when we find something that seems to contradict Paul, then we accept Paul as our doctrinal authority, because Jesus Christ wants us to do that. Okay, so the church, Jews, the Gentiles. Gentiles, anybody not a Jew? So the Bible doesn't break them up, as far as Shem, Ham, and Japheth, as far as the authors or the recipients of the Scriptures. It breaks them up, Jews and Gentiles. And then the Church of God. Now the Church of God, that's obviously dealing spiritually. We still have our physical distinctions. We're not going to have, it says in Galatians that there's neither male nor female. We're not putting up unisex bathrooms. Say, neither male nor female. No, we still have our physical distinctions. Now, was it Galatians 3:28? I think it was Galatians 3:28 that Bill Clinton, when he took the oath of office, had the Bible open to Galatians 3:28 and put his finger right on that verse. It's either 3:28 or 3:27. I think you should have put it on the one in Proverbs where it says it's better for a man to dwell in a housetop than in a wide house with a brawling woman. I think he understands that one better. But Galatians 3:28 is the one Clinton put his finger on. Believing in integration, one of the sexes, one of the races, one of all this stuff. A real perverted mess. Okay, 1 Corinthians 10:33. It says, even as I please all men in all things, not seeking mine own profit, but the profit of many, that they may be saved. Obviously, the idea is not trying to please everybody. It's going back to chapter 9 where it says, I'm all things to all men, that I might gain some. It's trying to find common ground with somebody so that you might win them to Christ. Even as I please all men. Nobody could do that. Nobody can please all men. I don't care if they compromise with everybody. Nobody can please all men. You can fool some of the people some of the time, but you can't fool all the people all the time. So the idea of pleasing them is at the end of the verse that you might save them. You might bring them to Christ. Okay, then chapter 11, verse 1, be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. Now that's who we follow. Bob Jones Sr. used to say, it is never wrong to follow a right man on the right path. Now, what Bible believers are usually branded as, we're usually branded as cultists. You're a Ruckmanite. You know, I've been called a Ruckmanite, and I ask them, what's a Ruckmanite? And I've not gotten a good definition. Must be. They have Ruckmanitis. It's a disease they have. But one guy, you know, I had called a preacher in. He was slandering. And so I thought, well, let's call that guy in. And he brought in his list of questions he's going to ask me. And number one question, are you a Ruckmanite? I smiled. I said, what's a Ruckmanite? He said, a follower of Pete Ruckman. I said, believing everything he says? He said, yes. I said, well, okay, if that's your definition, no, I'm not a Ruckmanite. Now, if his definition is believes the King James Bible, I said, okay, then I am a Ruckmanite. Depends what their definition is. You don't know what their definition is, so you got to ask them. And then he started asking all these dumb questions, which I thought were kind of funny. And then he, you know, a couple of days go by, and then he calls me and gives me the Baptist apology. I'm sorry if I offended you in any way. You know, one of those Baptist apologies. I laughed, and I said, you can offend me if you try, pal. And I quoted him Psalms 119, 165. But you know the world's even given apologies like that. You know that, you know, I never saw it, but you know, everybody, you know, the world lets you find out the wickedness going on out there about that Super Bowl halftime thing. And I read their apology in the paper. If it offended anybody, we are truly sorry. That isn't an apology. See, but so, they must have been going to Baptist church or something. I don't know what they've done. Okay, so Paul says, be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. So we follow Paul as he followed Christ. Now, people who listen to Limbaugh, they get the same charge against them. The liberals say that people who listen to Limbaugh are mind-dumb robots. They can't think for themselves. But I tell you who can't think for themselves is liberals. They don't have an original thought in their head. When we had in this county, we were fighting the Kankakee Marsh to try to take over and everything. Down at KV High School, they allowed people to give a 3-minute speech. And I sat there and I watched farmers, country people who weren't used to public speaking, and they'd get up and they'd kind of fidget with their fingers, but they would come up with an original thought. They were thinking. Then I'd hear a liberal come up and say, oh, we need to save the trees, save the trees. I'm thinking, oh, who pushed their tape recorder? They didn't have an original thought in their head. Liberals, all they do is parrot. You see, they evolved from a parrot, so they parrot things. They don't think. Usually when somebody charges something against you, it's because they are doing the same thing. They don't reason. And what you have to do is you got to try to figure out, is this guy a tape recorder or is he really believing what he's believing? And then you try to deal with him logically. But it's not wrong to follow a man on the right path. There are several cross-references for this one. Look in Galatians. I think it's Galatians what I want. Well, no, Ephesians. That's the next one. Ephesians 5:1. Philippians 3:17. It's another one. Ephesians 5:1. Be ye followers of God as dear children. The New Bible say imitators. Be imitators of God. That's a pretty raunchy thing to say. Philippians chapter 3, verse 17. Paul said this, Brethren, be followers together of me. Follow me, he says. Copycat me. Nothing wrong with being a copycat of somebody who's right, they're successful. 1 Thessalonians 1, verse 6. 1 Thessalonians 1, verse 6. Verse 5, you'll see that Paul preached the gospel to these people. Verse 5. Verse 6, it says, And ye became followers of us and of the Lord. And then so forth. A new babe in Christ, they need somebody to look up to. They need some sight. We walk by faith, not by sight. But a new believer in Christ, they need to see somebody living it right. And for them to follow them, that's okay. Now, eventually you want them to transfer their fellowship to God. Because as humans, we're going to disappoint people. But new believers need that. And it's not wrong. It's not a sin. You know, these people say you're a Ruckmanite. Well, who are they? They're following somebody. They're Greekites. You know, they're Hordites or Westcott-ites or whatever they call them. They're following somebody. Everybody's following somebody. You know, they're trying to be big and bold. Oh, we stand our own. No, they don't. No, they don't. You get talking to them about some things, you'll find out that they don't. Be followers of us as followers of God as dear children, or Christ. What does it say in Ephesians 5:1? Did it say God or Christ? Somebody have it open. Be followers of God as dear children. I like that. As dear children, not just plain old children. Follow God as a dear child, a child that's God's apple of His eye, drawing close to God, trying to be God's pet, the teacher's pet. Growing in grace?
No, not growing in grace, because it's a new catchphrase of the, I don't know what else to call it, charismatics.
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Oh, yeah. But you know, it never talks about us having a mature relationship with God at all. Anywhere in the Bible, it's always as a child.
Yeah. Yeah, it's as a child where He wants us to be as a child. Because children have childlike faith. And I do believe that's what we should. He says in 1 Corinthians 14, he says, in malice be children, but in understanding be men. There are some things we need to retain of our childhood. Humility, our goofiness. You know, some of it, the sense of humor, the knowing how to live, the laugh. Give up bitterness quick. Malice, don't hold on to malice. You see, it takes an adult to hold on to malice for years. Two little buddies, 6-year-old buddies, they can have a knockdown, drag-out fight. 10 minutes later, they're buddies. Adults hold on to that. So he says in 1 Corinthians 14, verse 20, Brethren, be not children in understanding, howbeit in malice be ye children, but in understanding be men. And so I believe it's a wise thing to be a follower of somebody. In a multitude of counselors, there is safety. And the thing is, you can save a lot of time when you find somebody who's an expert in their field and you want to do something in that field. Go to that expert and you can save a lot of time. Learn from their experience. Follow what they do. There's nothing wrong with following something that's successful. That's wise. That's being smart. So be followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. One time I said on the radio, if you would follow me, if you lived the way I lived, you wouldn't have to have locks in your door. You wouldn't have to have police. You wouldn't have to have judges. You would leave your money hanging out anywhere. You wouldn't have to worry about drugs. You wouldn't have to worry about booze. If you lived like I live, you can leave your house. I'm not going to come in and take anything. That's how we should live. That's how a Christian should live. And if the Christians got their way, the world would be a safer place to live in. But no, they don't look at it that way, do they? They want to steal and do all they can to get away with it. So, did that tape kick back there? No? Okay, that did. Okay, verse... Oh.
Well, that was timing, wasn't it?
Never mind. Okay, we'll stop there, verse 1. Any questions or comments?